Welcome everybody to our Zoom webinar live Q&A with three world experts, one of whom we're still trying to connect onto the call, but I thought I'd hit record and get us started because Bitten and Vera and I are chatting a little bit about the history of sugar addiction, food addiction, and it's, I think, interesting. So I just wanted to I'll do a formal invite when Joan pops on. So let's get back to this, telling us a bit more about a book called The Hidden Addiction, and Bitten was talking a little bit about some of the early pioneers in this space. Keep going.
Well, you know, I read that book in the end of the 80s. Since I'm a recovering alcoholic, you know, it was very interesting to see when I started to connect the dots with, you know, the sugar and the food. And she wrote the book. I think the other co-author was a doctor called Alan Norris. And as I Googled a lot on Janice Keller Phelps, and she got really neglected. You know, she wasn't taken serious, but it's a very good book where she talks if alcoholics and drug addicts really want to recover, they have to address the hidden addiction before, you know, the other addiction. So I think the name is excellent. And I mean, there was no research like we have today. There was tons of research. Yeah. But I'm amazed that she could write what she saw and that she was so spot on, you know. And the same with John Judkin. I read his book. And so I really did dedicate my latest book to both those two, and with the words, "You were right."
Awesome.
I thought that was good. You
That's
know?
great. Yeah.
So she gets honored there. She's dead, and he is too. But I think they should be mentioned. And also, you know, Dusty that wrote Sugar Blues. That's another very good book. And Nancy Appleton, she also wrote a book about sugar. They didn't have the whole picture, but you know, it's fascinating. I read these books a long time ago when you start putting that together with the pieces we have today. Yeah. It's fascinating to see, since we get so ignored, you know, sugar addiction, food addiction is not real. And then all these pioneers have talked about it, saw it, described it, tried to heal it, work with recovery and have good suggestions for years and years, for such a long time. And still the society is not awake. I mean, woo. So
yeah, although
that's how I feel about it. I like to look at the history.
Yes, me too. I've actually written a bit about it. I dedicated my work to William Duffy as well, because the first book that awakened me was The Sugar Blues, and there was no going back. It just lit me up, and I was so on fire, and I was so excited to get off sugar. And then when I realized how incredibly difficult it was to get 3 days, I slowly had that sinking feeling after several weeks. There's something not right here. Yeah. I think I'm addicted to sugar. And then, you know, I talked to my friends about that, and they'd laugh their heads off. Oh, that's so funny, Florence. Oh, you're so funny. You can't be addicted to sugar. You need that to live.
Yeah. You're imagining.
Yeah, my initiation into this whole field was the book that we mentioned earlier, Potatoes Not Prozac. I remember reading that thinking, you mean this could actually be like a drug? You know, I mean, it was just the seed. Later, when I got into the field, I really and read these other books. But that was for me, that was the first introduction.
Wow. Yeah. And she had 3 books out. I had read the Sugar Blues, and in the back of the Sugar Blues are some references to other books. I ordered all of those books. Some of them were used and tattered, but I ordered them and I got them. And then I went into the references in the back of those books and started to pull them out. At one point in my life, I felt like I was probably one of the biggest nerdy, most up-to-date on this topic, so much so. And then I realized that after I tried to get sugar out of my diet, and I wound up, you know, hitting that deprivation mode, which led to the binging, which wasn't there before. I just ate it all day long. And then I started to deprive, and then I would binge, and then I wound up with an eating disorder. And I thought, this is crazy. Yeah. And I thought there's a connection between sugar addiction and eating disorders in women. Yeah. So I decided to write up a 2-page summary and go off to Ireland, actually, to do my master's on the topic.
I remember reading that about you.
Yeah. And so I got accepted into Trinity College, and I get there and I have all these nerdy little pieces of science, of research from all these various different books that I had read. And Loma Linda University, there had been a little study. In Laval University in the late 1960s, they were doing studies with mice and sugar, showing that it acted like an opiate. Anyway, so I get to my campus and my graduate thesis committee, and I'm so excited to tell them about this idea and how I was going to unpack this master's thesis. And the committee was kind of looking at me, okay, well, show us your research. And I'm like, oh, well, there's this and these little scraps of paper. And anyways, and eventually they kind of looked at me and shook their head and just basically said, you can't do your thesis on this topic. Well, they came back and said, you can't do your thesis on this topic. And I'm like, why? I'm so onto something here. Yeah. They said it's because one of them said, and they were looking down, it was really awkward. And one of them said, because you will not embarrass this institution with this topic. There's no science that suggests that sugar could be addictive or that is bad for us, or, and I was devastated. But about 3 years later, I came back from Trinity College, came back to Canada, and Kathleen Desmaisons. Hey, Joan! Kathleen Desmaisons had written her first book. Oh, yeah. And I was like, oh, she did it! This is great! And I hugged her, and I loved it. Yeah. She did it. She did it anyways, and did it way better than I could ever in a million years have done. So it was so awesome.
Yeah. It was Hi, Joan. Very much my way.
Sorry.
Hi, Joan.
Hey, everybody. Hello.
Hello.
We're just riffing on the history of sugar and food addiction and some of the early pioneers and authors. And when did Kay Shepherd write her book? Was that the late 80s, 1980s?
Yeah, I think late 80s, beginning 90s.
Yeah, she's really, even though she's still on, I think she's still working. She's definitely a pioneer. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Julia Ross was very early on into this too.
Yeah, I read her books too when they came. Yeah, I read those too. And I spoke to her that time.
Mm-hmm.
Me too.
I've asked Kay Shepherd how she got started. And there was the Glen Bay Hospital had actually a food addiction recovery ward. And then the insurance companies declared that it didn't exist and the ward had to break up. But Kay and Phil Wardell and
he's definitely a pioneer too. We have to mention him.
Yeah.
In context.
Who's the priest? There was a priest involved at that time, Father.
I don't know him.
Yeah.
Amazing. So fun. Oh, great. Well, maybe we can
chat. And Dr. Stark. Dr. Stark.
Dr. Stark? Who's Dr. Stark?
Well, there was just this crew. There was Kay and Phil, Dr. Stark, and this father. Oh, that's terrible. I can't remember his name. There was actually a group of practitioners. I would say, Julia Ross got the concept. And then there's the book, Beyond Our Wildest Imagination, that talks about the very earliest days of OA, starting to come to grips with abstinence. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I would love
and Joan Abbott. Let's not forget Joan Abbott and Patricia Devlin. I got to meet them in Chicago, 1993. Joan Abbott was actually the one starting, took the model from what we call Minnesota treatment, like 12-step based treatment for alcoholics and drug addicts. And she just transferred that on to food addicts. Mm-hmm. And many of them talked about food alcoholism.
Yeah, wow.
Used that terminology to talk about the loss of control because they didn't, use the word addiction because they were thinking, in that way. But they say, we are like alcoholics. We're food alcoholics. So I was over in Chicago at the Trinity General Hospital, 1993. That's when I started in October. And I met with them. And, I remember Patricia Devlin, the dietitian that worked with Joan Abbott. She said to me, whatever you do, get a dietitian or somebody that likes because she asked me, do you like talking about food? No, it's boring. I don't like cooking. And she said, okay, get a dietitian that do that for you, or these people are going to drive you up the wall talking food. And that's was really true.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, we're obsessed with foods. We want to talk about food, but you know, that was funny. So I'll never forget them. And Joan Ifland has written the book too, with lots of stories.
We see this, and then this coincides with the tobacco companies coming into processed foods.
Yep.
Starting to load them up with addictive substances, which is mid 1985.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
True. Then the problem just explodes.
Yeah.
Wow.
We can see that for sure.
Awesome. So what I'll do is I'm going to just do another formal introduction now that Dr. Ifland, if you'd like, you can rename your your name on your camera. It's saying Amy, but I think there should be 3 dots, and I think you can rename yourself. Hopefully you can. And I'll just do another quick welcome. And then maybe what I'll get the 3 speakers to do is just do a quick little introduction, like their credentials, their history, how they got started, something, whatever they want to share about themselves. And then we'll start to field questions. So for those of you that are just hopping on, please put your questions into the Q&A section. And then we'll just read questions from there. Oh, there we go, Dr. Ifland, you got it, perfect. So, Bitten, why don't we start with you? Do an introduction of yourself.
Okay, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I was smoking at that time. So after 7 years in recovery from that, you know, I decided to be healthier. So I quit smoking, and I drowned in sugar. I mean, chocolate was, you know, my breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack. I mean, you name it. So that's all I wanted to eat. I loved it. And of course, I got a lot of consequences, you know, all kinds of consequences, mainly fatigue and, of course, some weight gain, but that wasn't the worst, the fatigue and the craziness. But anyway, so that's when I started to look at it. And as I said, I ended up in Chicago because I was working with Parkside Medical Corporation in Sweden at that time. And I met Joan Ifland and Patricia Devlin, and they said to me that I was a food addict. And I said, I never heard that name. What's that? What is a food addict? And I said, I don't want to be any more addicted because, you know, alcohol and nicotine was enough. So I said, no more addictions. I'm a nurse since 1973. And of course, as a nurse, very interested in health and that. So during my own treatment, I loved addiction medicine. I still love addiction medicine, and I love working with addicts. That's my life. So that's what I do. And I also am Addison Sugar certified, and I teach today. I don't take clients, I teach professionals, and that's wonderful. So that's me.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about how you teach professionals. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, when I started 2012, you know, I ran a treatment facility and I had to close it because we had too much clients, and the NHS didn't want to pay for all of them. So I had to close it, and I had a queue of 375 patients. That's what I have to close. I mean, yeah, that's horrible. But anyway, that's Sweden. So, and they don't like the diagnosis, food addiction. Mm-hmm. But what I do, I've developed the holistic addiction medicine because, you know, I work by the definition that this is a brain illness with physical, psychological, social, and spiritual consequences. So, of course, I developed the treatment program, a protocol, with tools, many tools in all those areas. And that's why I call it holistic. So that's what I teach. I teach professionals how to screen, assess, diagnose sugar food addiction, and how to develop food plans. So it's a 1-year online training, you know, with lots of ingredients. Like I have several people in my faculty. We talk about oxytocin, we talk about biochemical repair, we talk about 12-step, we talk about other support groups, the importance of that, detox, relapse prevention. That's the big thing. I love working with relapse prevention and relapse, which I think is a lecture. You know, any relapse is a lecture. So I teach clients how to get up from it, and, you know, what to do about it and how to avoid it and stuff like that. No shame. It's a lecture. So that's what I do, you know, and I take metabolic syndrome. I work a lot with, you know, insulin, leptin, adrenaline resistances, and how to heal, a metabolically destroyed body from processed foods, and how to restore health. I love the thinking that when we are active in our addiction, our brain is wrongly wired or not wired. It's like this beautiful house with billions of rooms. There is a electricity cord going to all the rooms, but there's no electricity. All the darn electricity is in the reward center and in the reptilian brain. Survival, drug, So, and I like to talk about addiction as the primary thing. I like to say that I put the horse in front of the wagon, not the other way around. Because a lot of people work with the consequences of it, but they don't work with the addicted brain. So my favorite thing to do and my specialty is to heal the brain, to reconnect, send electricity out to all parts of the brain, and then you're free to be the best who you are forever.
Awesome. I love it. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dr. Vera Tarman, would you please introduce yourself?
Okay. I'm Dr. Vera Tarman, and I like Bitten. I don't like to cook, but I really like to eat. Dietitian on board. I am an addictions physician, and that's sort of how I got into the field. I had my own history that I called an eating disorder or bulimia, didn't understand it. But when I got into the field of addiction, not only did I see the patterns of behavior with my addicts, acting the very same way with food as they had with cocaine and alcohol and cigarettes, that to me, it was a no-brainer. It was so obvious. And I started speaking about that. But, like probably everybody on the panel, found that my opinions were, laughed at, dismissed. But it was when I've discovered the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Nora Volkov did that seminal journal feature in 2008, saying, and talked about Nicole Avina's, I think that was the beginning of her work, the rat and the brain being highlighted with Oreo cookies or whatever it was that she was looking at then. I thought, now I've got the science. And once I had science in my hand, I wasn't going to be stopped. So I started talking about it professionally, and then as much as I could on social media sites and whatnot, just to get it out there. And it's amazing. I mean, we were talking about the pioneers. It's like the ground was laid already in the community, but we had to have that scientific and clinical stamp, which is exactly what we're doing now. I mean, Joan, you've got a wonderful book that gives that stamp. And anyway, I mean, we're at that edge now, and so I think we're really, really in a privileged position, and I'm really glad to be on the bus at this turning point. I don't know for how long, but at this particular point, I'm thrilled to be on this bus. That's it for me. Well, I guess I should say I'm a medical director of Renaissance, and we have a food addiction program, both in-house and outhouse, you know what I mean, outpatient. Yeah, and so I continue to work in the field clinically as well. Okay, that's it for me.
And she teaches in my faculty. She teaches my students too.
Yeah, and also, in fact, the Esther. Yeah, yep.
Fantastic. And did you mention that you have a second edition on your book, Food Junkies?
Yes, I have Food Junkies, which came out in I don't remember, 5 years ago, and then a second edition this year. But what I'm really thrilled about is that I got a French edition now, so that's really great. So anyway, I'm really happy about that. Thank you.
That's so amazing. Thank you so much. Dr. Joan Ifland.
Well, I'd like to say that my addiction started with my grandfather, who owned a candy store. I was addicted at conception. We now know that my parents' genes were replicating in an addictive way. And I had a very traumatic childhood, and learned that I could numb that with processed foods. Yeah, fast forward, finally, after having 2 children in '83 and '84, I became a yo-yo dieter. That's also about the time frame when tobacco was putting addictive substances in our food. And came across Kay Shepherd's book in 1996, got into recovery, thanks to actually being in a different 12-step group for miserable personalities. So I was a rager, and my parents were ragers, and I had an older sister who was also a rager. And that's what I was determined not to do for my children. So I did the only thing that was available at that time, which was one-on-one therapy, which did not help at all. And then I did women's groups, and then I did the codependency group. And it was somebody in the codependency group who saw sugar driving the rage and told me about it.
Wow.
So in 1996, I gave up sugars and flours, and the raging just faded away. It was shocking, along with sinus infections and fatigue and brain fog and cravings and allergies and depression and anxiety. So I adopted it as a career. I had a Stanford MBA. I had an undergraduate degree from Oberlin College in economics and political science. I had worked for a state government. I worked for a Fortune 200 company. And I just said, oh no, this is what I have to do. I have to tell everybody. I started with a one-page handout, don't eat, or eat this, and just eat these foods. And I noticed that nobody could do it. I got my own household on board. I got my own household cleared out. And my kids just started performing unbelievably, like no competition. And then I thought, oh, well, I'll just tell them. I have to tell them. So I wrote a book, a popular book, which is now out of date, over 3 years. And then I started giving talks about it. And I got interviewed to be on one of the big national TV talk shows. And they came back and said, you don't have a degree in your field, and we owe our viewers that expertise. And I just said, well, I'll go get one. And I grew up in Cincinnati, where Union Institute is, and that is the School for New Fields. I got to talk to Kathleen de Maison, who went there, and she said, yes, that's the place to go. So I did that in 3 years, and then we published the first description of, we called it refined food addiction, in the academic press. And that article has now been cited hundreds of times by other researchers who are now attracted to the field. So I went along, got a doctoral divorce, and opened a food company. I thought, oh, I'll just give them the food. They'll see how good they feel, and then they'll just start. No, that did not work. This is a really severe addiction. It's just like handing an alcoholic who's also doing meth and heroin and cigarettes and marijuana, just like, oh, just stop. You know, that's what that prepared meal company really did. But what I did see there is that we had some very high-end clients who got results. And I thought, well, this is a very widespread addiction, because we see people, very high-functioning people, who are losing the cravings and the fatigue and the brain fog. So I then got a contract to write the textbook. And I just had the grace. My father had just died, and I had the financial wherewithal to just sit for 3 years looking at about 8,000 studies and pulling out the 2,000 best and fitting them into like a mosaic, like a puzzle. And what emerged was, this is a very, 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 very serious addiction. This is a more serious addiction than we've ever seen on the planet, because there have never been cheap enough addictive substances to addict children.
Yeah.
And have it so cheap that it could be accessed by anybody. And then have the deception of the tobacco industry, very expert at deception, spreading addictions, the advertising, the availability, the highly addictive product formulation, and then focusing on children. I call it the 5 A's of the business addiction model. This is an addiction model. It's a business model. And the tobacco companies got a hold of the processed food industry in the mid-1980s. They were already very good at spreading addiction worldwide. And that's why you see the obesity epidemic spread so fast. So what
are the 5 A's?
Advertising, availability, affordability, addictive product formulation, young age of onset. It's a vicious model. It's how smoking became the leading cause of preventable death. And it's why diet-related diseases have now overtaken smoking as the leading cause of preventable death worldwide. That's how this got to the, the back alleys of Rio de Janeiro, just overnight practically. They got the addiction model inserted into processed foods.
Can we ask questions amongst each other?
Yeah.
Joan, where would you fit in maybe it's in the availability piece. The thing that's unique about food is not only is it's so available and cheap, but we have pushers like the parents from day one, or even in vitro with you. So where would we fit that? Because that's different than cigarettes. That's even worse.
Well, my parents pushed cigarettes on me by smoking in the household.
Yeah, I guess. And also while she was pregnant.
Yeah.
Would you say exposure availability? Could it be under availability?
Oh, yeah. It's just like, so just think of the parents as being trained by the food industry to be their agents.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So they're engaged in all 5 of those.
Yeah.
They're spreading it right along with they're spreading it as an agent. They are addicted themselves.
Yeah.
Teachers are addicted. Principals are addicted. It is, it's really curious at this point to be in this quarantine and finally be able to say to parents, you have 100% control over what your children are eating. Why don't you just try it out? See what your child looks like without processed foods. It's a hard fight. But based on the textbook, when I saw that in the textbook, I said, I'm not going to start talking about the textbook until I see whether I can develop effective recovery based on this principle that this is a really, really severe addiction. Everyone I've ever met who's come to me and as a self-acknowledged food addict would qualify for residential treatment. Millions of people.
Yeah, I agree.
And they are, of course, we're not going to get that. And you can't do, in my opinion, residential treatment has this huge drawback, which is all the rewiring that Bitten's talking about happens in a place, and place triggers are incredibly powerful. So you go through the residential treatment and then you go home, and your home is a massive relapse trigger, that place. Because this is an addiction that happens in the bedroom, the dining room, the kitchen. It doesn't happen in bars. It doesn't happen in shooting galleries. So I finally came up with an online recovery program that I now can say works. We're still tweaking, but it's online. And that means you're recovering in your home. And that means that your brain is wiring to triggers, cues, to recovery cues instead of food cues in the home, in your own car, on the streets where you drive. And that is working. Finally, after 24 years, I have a program that is working.
Awesome.
We're still learning. We're doing a lot about intake at this point, how to make sure that we're using mirror neurons. And it's because the research shows the frontal lobe is just not working. All the resources go to the other 98% of the brain. And that little 2% new brain is just not a match. This whole idea of willpower is just traumatic.
Do you think, Joan, don't you think it's interesting that, you know, when I started addiction training many years ago, I learned that prefrontal cortex is maturing from the age of 5 until 20. Later research came on, it was until 25. And Oxford University in England just published an article a couple of months ago. They said that, well, prefrontal cortex is not maturing until you are 30. And I think it's very interesting, 20, 25, 30. What's causing that? Did we do crazy studies before or no? I think I know what's causing that. It's all the shit food that kids get that hampers the wiring in the prefrontal cortex.
The cognitive delay.
What do you think about, causes delay?
Yeah. This is, again, going back to Nora Volkoff. It was one of the first things she discovered in the brain imaging research. Is that when the brain is in a craving state, the frontal lobe stops firing.
Yeah.
So when you have 50% sugar baby formula, we also see extensive, really hardcore, excellent studies on cognitive impairment in people who chronically use processed foods. Yeah. So that was a breakthrough realization. You cannot teach this because teaching happens in the frontal lobe. The only hope is to engage mirror neurons because mirror neurons are helpless. They're just robotic. What's going on? Okay, let's copy that. What's going on? Oh, that person? Yes, let's copy that. They're fickle. They just copy the last person. They copy people they know well, and they particularly copy around food. So this is why these online groups are so, finally, I mean, after 24 years, I counted up once, I've tried 14 different ways to help food addicts. The only reliable thing I did was I did my doctoral internship in a faith organization, a small faith organization where people had been attending for 40 years. And once one person got on it, mirror neuron engagement happened. It spread through that little organization and they all got it.
You know,
and it was mirror neuron engagement.
If I can just throw in that it's also a lot of people quarrel about the concept of using this word addiction and, you know, why can't we just use some other word that's less stigmatic? But I think the word addiction is so crucial because along the lines of what Joan is saying, you can't teach this stuff. And in addiction, we recognize that. It has to be a behavioral practice. It has to be a relationship like mirror neurons. And the addiction field is full of those tools, the 12-step program, other programs like that, which, you know, are act yourself into right thinking because you can't think your way into it. So I just want to suggest that it just fits in with this idea that we need to have that addiction paradigm. We have to have it.
I have fought that tooth and nail for years, that people will call it something else and say I was addicted or I was an abuser, which is dangerous because addiction is deadly. If you don't stop an addiction, arrest it, you're going to die. So it's very important to use the word addiction. And I have no problem once I teach somebody what addiction is and what the addicted brain is, what happened, how they developed an addiction. Yeah. People embrace it and they own it. And once they do, they can start recovery. If you fight it, you can't. So yes, absolutely.
Well, the problem is that you need hours and hours and hours then of reprogramming. And that we offer 4 hours a day of live meetings led by a facilitator. Because the other thing that didn't really get to happen in those childhood years is relationship management. Yeah.
Yeah.
True.
I noticed when I came into 12-step recovery for food addiction, everybody was fighting all the time.
Interesting. And I, as a mom of an 18-year-old, so I'm still in the thick, just on the tail end of having for the last 18 years, watching what's happening with children in schools and food and how I was mocked by undermined and mocked by my own family, and they're good people, but they really truly believed that I would, by denying Sky marshmallows and s'mores when we camped, I was truly doing her harm. But my Sky is sensitive like me, right? And I can see that my sugar addiction is multi-generational. And she's just the next generation down, and every generation it seems to impact them even harder. The things that, you know, maybe were hitting somebody in their 60s, you know, are now 40s and now 20. Now Scott, oh my gosh. So my daughter breaks my heart every day. She's hooked. She knows it. Her friends are hooked. The anxiety, the depression, but it's just crazy to watch. And so I feel that for us as women, those of us that are free, and Amy's not online yet. I just sent her a text to say join us, but she'll come. She's here. She's just not got her camera on. But once we're free, there's such an overwhelming, powerful desire to turn around and to help get other women out of the mud, men and women. You're not making money doing this. You've got a day job, Vera. Bitten, you're teaching only professionals. Joan, you and I are in the trenches working with people, you know, clients, and but generally speaking, we're doing this because it literally hurts our heart to know that this stuff is coming and taking our children and taking away decades of our lives. So I wanted to add one thing about how hopefully once women get free, we now turn around and help teenagers and children and work in our schools and work at high levels of government and policy. And the World Health Organization is on this. They're just dropping the ball because there's other issues that are more pressing, but really there isn't. I want to share a story about, I'll tell a little bit about my background as well. I'm like Joan. I have this very nerdy, sciencey, academic brain that has devoured books on this topic for 30 years now, actually. And I was the person that bought all the books as soon as they came out. I read all of Dr. Kathleen de Maison's books, and I brought them to bed and I hugged them, because in my world there was no one to talk to about this, and I knew there was something to the sugar addiction issue, but I didn't know anybody in my physical world. There was no capacity for mirror neuron activity happening because I was the freak, right? The food freak that was trying to cut out sugar. Mm-hmm. So it was so great to bring her books to bed. And then, you know, all of Dr. Nancel Appleton's book came out, and I had the 46 ways, it was 142 originally, ways that sugar destroys your health on my fridge in university when all my friends would read it and roll their eyes. But years and years ago, not so many years ago, I shouldn't say that many years ago, within the last 8 years or so, I read a book called In the Land of Ice. And it's nothing to do with sugar whatsoever. It's a book that someone had recommended about these early voyages to try and find the North Pole. And in Europe in the late 1800s, I believe, mid 1800s, they had believed that the North Pole, because there was warm waters that would come down past Alaska, they believed that there was a tropical paradise, that the Garden of Eden was in the North Pole, believe it or not, truly. And mappers in the early days genuinely believed that if we could just get to the North Pole, that's where this tropical paradise was. So many men had gone on these expeditions and had died. And there's this one particular expedition that was very well funded and very well documented. And this book was written about it. And these sailors who had got past Alaska and into the very sort of higher reaches of Canada there, had discovered an island of completely 100% isolated, this island that was sufficient to feed them. They had seaweed, they had some plants that they could eat, and then they lived on seals and whales, etc. And this island was completely peaceful, happy, healthy, no known violence, like just beautiful. And white men had come and had introduced alcohol. And within one generation, do you know this story, Joan?
No, it's the story of the American Indians as well.
It's very similar, but because it was an island, like truly isolated, but they were known by people on the mainland of Alaska, but they had their own tribes and their own thing happening on this island. And I forget the name of the island, but they introduced alcohol. And within one generation, the menfolk in particular had become so addicted to this alcohol that they started battering their wives. They stopped fishing and hunting effectively. And they literally, it was just like that. There was no childhood trauma.
Right. Thank you. Thank you.
There was
Thank you very much. I like that one too.
Yes.
Right. There was
That's putting the
nothing.
horse in front of the wagon, finally.
This is
Right.
a mechanical problem.
That's right. It was a body that lit up on this alcohol and swept it away, and almost the entire population of this island died off. A few women and children were rescued and taken over to the mainland. That's it. One generation.
I know.
And it's so right. It's so jaw-dropping to read, and it's one of the purest studies, and it's modern. It's relatively recent, right? So I mean, that really, and I love that you guys are all nodding your heads, because how many decades did I spend in therapy trying to fix myself? Because there must be something really wrong with me that I can't stop binge eating chocolate chip cookies.
Oh, I think we can all agree on this panel that therapy was not the solution. I mean, Joan,
wonderful work. I'm not dishing therapy. It's wonderful work, but I say it's irrelevant to kicking addiction. And on the other side, the work that you do as a human being, spiritually and emotionally and psychologically, etc.
Yeah, this is
beautiful
the
work.
hardest.
It keeps
this
you
is
sober.
the hardest.
Yeah,
because
stop the food.
The other day, so we have a Facebook group, Food Addiction Education. We're closing on 14,000 members.
Great.
The other day I went out and I said, you know, this is a mechanical problem. I got slammed. What is wrong with you? You keep thinking this is about the food. You're just ridiculous. This is a childhood issue. I started in childhood. I was just like, okay, you're being rude. You're out of the group. You know, we don't allow rudeness, and we don't allow insulting, and we don't allow name calling. Just out. We're gonna have a quiet discussion of the science here. But yes, and if you are a practitioner and you have trained for years and years in these are childhood issues, let's just resolve the childhood issues, and you're going to fight this tooth and nail.
Yeah, but come and do my training. I teach you to put the horse in front of the wagon once and for all.
Yes.
I cram you with knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is mechanical.
Oh, there's your new puppy.
Like a little bear.
So cute, Bitten. So cute.
I want to go back to what Florence was saying about how do you spread this, because you can't teach it. So I do want to just add that we are now training. So the Addiction Reset Communities is this online community, 4 hours a day, lots of PMing and emailing that we've developed. And we are now training people to have this as a small business. This is my MBA coming to the fore. I said for years, if I can give somebody a job doing this, that is how we will spread this. So I do want to just slide that in there, that we now have ARC manager training underway. People can train and get a small job. Bitten has just went for training. She's training professionals. I am training food addicts to run these ARC online communities. So now we can in the world. Yeah.
It's so great. And I love, Joan, that you talk about raging and mood disorders, because it benefits everybody when we're all happier, when we're balanced. And I don't know how many years it took me, being post sugar, flour, all junk food free, before my brain just came into this beautiful resilience. And it's not like I haven't gone through life challenges. Some of the darkest things I've ever gone through have been on the other side of ending my addiction. Well, I say ending in the sense that for me, I don't wake up ever and wonder if I'm going to eat that day. It's like, it's over. And I do everything in my power to guard my sugar sobriety with my life. It's one of my most precious things. Yeah. But I lost my thread, sorry.
Well, you know what happened is you had this huge field, thank you very much, processed food industry expert at addicting millions of people, this huge field of helplessly reactive, conditioned neurons. And because you got into enough recovery spaces, you've now programmed a bigger field of recovery neurons. These are neurons that helplessly react to environmental cues. We only have 2% of the brain is a are thinking neurons, analytical neurons, evaluative neurons. The whole other 98% of the brain is reacting based on conditioning. So you had the grace to get a big enough field of recovery trained neurons, just finally got bigger than the addicted neurons, and thereby gain control of behavior. This is a mechanical process that you achieve with hours and hours and hours of exposure to new environmental cues. So, I mean, that's just a victory in this culture. Very few people get there.
Yeah, down the road down the road, it is my desire to work with young adults and children, like somehow, because I live it every day with my daughter. It's just so painful, and she can be a rager. Mostly she's lovely, but she does have these moments, and she even says, "Mom, I don't even know what happens." And I do know, but I don't know how to work with them until they've got a neocortex. Until an addict's ready, there isn't really that window. So she knows what I do. And I hope that by the time she's ready for help, there'll be groups for teens that can mirror on. Joan, maybe you and I could work on that. Is that something we can work on, getting groups with teens?
Yes, so this is
we started one in Sweden.
Did you?
Yeah, we have one for groups. One of my counselors, one I trained, she's working with families and teenagers and put them together.
Oh, thank you. That'd be wonderful.
Maybe she's listening. I don't know if she's listening. I think she is, or if she's going to listen later. But
okay, awesome.
And then I have one more coming in to start working with that. She works with young teenagers with eating disorder.
Beautiful.
Moderation eating. She's fighting tooth and nail with the psychiatric youth people that are going to have talk therapy and childhood and and train them to eat ice cream as snacks and all other crazy things. She's working with getting them to understand this concept that we're talking about.
Amazing.
2 in Sweden. Ooh, 2.
Yeah,
that's so great. Oh, I can hardly wait to see where this is at in 10 years. Like, I'd love to see there be a sugar detox center in every city, every major city in every country. Dr. Tarman, were you trying to jump in there?
Yeah, I just want to say, I think that one of the consequences of this COVID is, like, all of us have a Facebook community that we're fostering for this very thing. And now there's Zoom groups popping up, like David is doing something, you're doing something. We have a couple things in Canada where we're trying to do, and so many more people are now aware of Zoom and the willingness to use it, that I think this is potentially the time. So I think it's going to happen, because we all acknowledge that the need for support to maintain sobriety after you get clean is crucial. Yeah. Absolutely crucial.
Easily accessible support over Zoom, in your pocket, on your cell phone.
And we have to build a bubble to moderate the influences of the environment outside.
Yeah.
All the change comes from the grassroots, from under.
Yes.
That people take responsibility for their own recovery. And start working recovery, yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And they get the right resources.
Voluntary army of Zoom.
Here's what I'm going to do now. So what I'm going to do, for those of you who've been wonderfully putting your questions in the Q&A, is I'm going to take each question one by one. And I'm just going to give, so I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to ask an expert to answer it. And then I'll give the other 2 experts an opportunity, well, I guess all 3 of us an opportunity to add anything if we feel we'd like to. And then I'll take the next question, and I'll ask the next expert. So each expert has the opportunity to take the lead on a question, and then the others will have an opportunity to add anything if they like. So, okay, let's start with the questions. First question here. Nope, that's the chat. Give me a second. Q&A. I think. Okay, so I'm not eating sweeteners of any kind. Is vanilla considered a sweetener? Might it cause cravings? Thank you. So Bitten, just because you're first up on my screen, would you mind answering that?
Vanilla powder, pure vanilla powder is a flavoring. And I would say that it's not a sweetener. If there's nothing added more than organic vanilla powder, you know, it's a flavoring. But I would say that it can trigger somebody that has been, you know, really into, you know, it could be a memory trigger. So the smell and what you put it in, I wouldn't know what I would put it in, but, you know, it could trigger. We call those cue-induced cravings.
Yes.
So that's certainly, you know, something to be aware of, because your brain will associate it with something with that the drug was in. So I would be very cautious. But if somebody would use a little bit in something, I don't know what, maybe some yogurt, I don't know, and not trigger on that, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
It's an associative cue for sugar, because you only use it with sugar.
Yeah,
It's an associative cue.
Yeah.
Dr. Tarman, do you have anything to add to that?
Just the mechanics behind it, that the anticipation of sweet implies sugar is coming, and so we have a dopaminergic response, which is a trigger in and of itself. So just anticipating something can be. I think it's one of those things that's in the gray area. If you're not highly triggered, you might be able to manage it, but it is playing with fire. I think if you want to be safe, stay away. That would be my suggestion.
As I can hear my 12-step buddies from 24 years ago. Do you need that? Do you have to have that? No, you don't. Absolutely don't.
Our next question is the medical community as a whole coming around to the concept of sugar addiction, or is there still a long way to go? Dr. Tarman.
Yeah, I could spend the rest of our time talking about that, and I won't. I would say for the most part, no, but where we are seeing some hope is in the keto community, because I think they've stumbled upon a solution without even realizing that it also looks for food addiction. And in the keto community, there are people that are also now struggling because they're, as Bitten has agreed, starting to, eat those stupid little treats on the side with sweeteners and whatnot, and are having trouble. And so now it's our turn to get in there and say, hey, this is why it's food addiction. So I think that there's room, I don't know about the States, but in Canada, we have a fairly large, still small in terms of the larger medical community, but at least 500 doctors who are writing about low carb and how important that is. And that means no sugar, no flour. When I got on there and said, look, it's also that we're dealing with the addiction, they were very open to that. So there's pockets where there's openness, besides, of course, people like Lustig. But he's a rare bird. In the larger medical community, I think that's where our entry point will be, but it's cracking.
Yes, there's a tiny bit of light. Anyone else like to add to that, Bitten or Joan?
I go to these conferences and they needed, this is going to sound self-serving, but it is my observation. They needed the science. You have these doctors, all these health professionals who are trained to pay attention to the research. And now we have the textbook. And I will tell you, I've stood across the table, the book table, from doctors who they look at the book and they're like, yeah. And I say, open the book. And then they start to see page after page of the 2,000 citations in that book. And you can see the shift in their eyes. Oh, there's science. Oh, this is a science book. Oh, I thought this was a personal memoir. No, it's over. The science argument is over. You cannot look past 2,000 citations and say this doesn't exist and it's not supported by science. They need it. They're the victims of their training. They're the victims of the pharmaceutical companies controlling medical training.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
They're not the problem. They want to do well. They want to do the right thing. Yeah.
Oh, that's so well put. And I would add that many of them are also getting sick as well. And they're starting to, through their own personal journeys, look at alternatives to healing their own medical conditions beyond just pharmaceuticals and surgery. So they're in there with us. Bitten, anything to add to that?
Well, I would say that in Sweden anyway, because I've been lecturing for 27 years here, They know sugar addiction. People say, yeah, we know sugar addiction exists, but they don't understand the addicted brain. They don't understand, the loss of control. They don't understand the implication of what they're saying medically and how to treat it. They think that you could cut down or da-da-da. But I would say that the low-carb keto movement is the place where people started understanding it, where they train doctors, in many places in the world. But they still don't understand some of the implications of the food because they use a lot of substitutes, yes. Which of course people going there love to have, the keto bread and the keto desserts and bada bada. So they don't understand. And they used to tell me that, well, if we treat their blood sugar, if they get an even blood sugar, we would cure the food addiction. And I go, oh man, I mean, let's start all over. So. But they are familiar with the concept and they do understand that it is a problem, but they don't understand how it is a problem and what to do about it.
Yes, very few people do. I mean, we're still learning.
Yeah.
How do you deliver these hours and hours and hours of reprogramming? How do you access mirror neurons for the hours and hours and hours per day needed to reprogram that massive field of addicted neurons? It's just severe addiction means they're just mass billions and billions and billions of neurons helplessly, reflectively reacting to environmental cues.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story that you told me in one of our summit interviews, Bitten, about how the medical establishment's response to sugar and food addiction. So they've got these clients that are obese and are compulsively overeating and are reaching out to doctors for help. And they came up with a really brilliant solution. They created, I can't believe this, still to this day, they created this solution in Sweden, and I don't know if it's beyond Sweden, where they will...
It is beyond Sweden today.
It is, they'll cut a hole into your stomach. You can eat as much as you want, and it drains into a pouch so you can keep eating.
Oh, yeah, you have a peg, you have a plastic peg in your, it's called Aspiration Method.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that shows how crazy this is, how desperate people are.
But beriatric surgery in general,
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That was just the latest one over here.
And I feel it's also a reflection. In a sense, it's a deference to the fact that it is that freaking difficult. This is that difficult an addiction that the best we can come up with is a tube out of our stomach so we can keep eating because we can't imagine that there's any other way to stop this compulsion. So intense.
I think that's what the medical community thinks too, but there's no meaning working with them because they can't stop. And I said, with the right teaching and methods, they can stop.
Absolutely.
That's what they don't want to learn.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely.
There's no quick fix, as Joan said. There's no quick fix to retrain the brain.
It takes hours and hours per day.
Weeks, years, months.
For the rest of your life, because
absolutely,
once you leave that online environment, if you stop coming to those meetings, mirror neurons will helplessly copy whoever comes next. And if it's people eating processed foods in your home, you're right back to it. It's a mechanical problem.
I had a slightly different experience, and maybe I'll fit that in there somewhere. But okay, so another question here for you, Dr. Ifland. I have stopped eating sugar, meaning processed sugar, flour, honey, and dried fruit. I eat whole fruit sparingly. Have I now made my body even more sensitive to any source of sugar? Will eating whole fruit begin to set me off?
Have I made my body more sensitive? No, I don't think so, but you have taken away your body's... No, I don't think that's the problem. I think the problem is that you haven't reprogrammed enough of your brain neurons not to respond.
Okay.
It's a brain issue. And fruit, yes, high sugar fruit is always going to be a problem for me. It's not in my house. Only low sugar fruits are in my house. It's just what we were talking about with the vanilla. I don't want to get anywhere close to substances that my addicted brain will respond to, because that programming will always be there. I've got this nice, huge field of counteracting programming set up in my brain, but that old, it's just like riding a bike. Riding a bike will always be there. If I might not ride a bike for 30 years, but I'll get on a bike, I'll wobble around for a few minutes, and then the bike neurons will wake up and I'll ride that bike. I don't have to relearn it. So this is such a severe addiction. I don't want to do anything to provoke it, even getting close to provoking it. But what people often miss when they say, well, you know, I eat fruit, it gives me cravings. It's like, what? There are 5 other major categories of craving triggers. And what's going on with those 5? Food is one of 6. So you got the food under control and you're still having cravings. It's because there are 5 other major sources of cravings triggers: body, environment, relationships, loneliness, and emotions. And so it's kind of funny, but in our recovery community, we don't talk about food. We're not allowed to talk about food in broad categories with our struggles. And we're not allowed to talk about body shape, because those are topics that the tobacco industry has used to pull us away from what's going on in our brains. So we talk about emotions, loneliness, relationships, body pain, but we really talk a lot about environmental cueing. And how do you set up a household? How do you set up your car? How do you transform your home from a relapse cue to a recovery cue? How do you transform your car from a relapse cue? Oh, we're going to go get something now. How do you transform your car from a relapse cue to a recovery cue? This is where I listen to podcasts. How do you convert driving down that boulevard, which is lined with fast food outlets? How do you convert that from a relapse cue to a recovery cue? We see the research. This is a cued disease. And it is a disease. The brain's doing the same thing as an alcoholic's brain.
Bitten or Dr. Tarman, do you have anything to add to that?
I don't use fruit in my food plan to people. I use berries, but not fruit, because in the long run, I see that people tend to want to overeat fruit and have them as a dessert or take one more. And, that's, as we say, 1 bite is too much and 1,000 is never enough. So it's it might be people that can do it, but I think it's a tricky business. And it also depends on your insulin resistant, your metabolic syndrome damage, your triggers, there are many factors. So if I do a general food plan, I always say, take away the fruit, eat berries.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Dr. Tarman?
Yeah, I want to say, we acknowledge that food addiction is a chronic and progressive condition. And if a person is in a mild state or even semi-mild, they may be able to get away with fruit, but I don't know if that will continue over time. Yeah. And there's hormonal changes that happen with women where they may have been able to get away with grain in their youth, but no longer can as they get older. I see that happen a lot. So is it a gradual degrading of our resistance, our hormonal and other metabolic resistances, that we can no longer eat those foods? Or it could be, as Joan is saying, the constant onslaught of cues over time wear us down too, so that that there is a progression, and you might be able to get away with something at one point, but not later. Yeah.
I just have that personally. I've cut out, I'm now 68. I've cut out many, many foods that I could eat 24 years ago when I started, happily.
Exactly.
Yeah, and sometimes the opposite is the truth as well, that in the early days, what you can't eat, you can go back to. I know that for me, when I gave up all the processed refined junk, that was stage 1. And then I discovered that for me, my sugar dragon was dragging other kinds of carbs in that were considered whole foods that were just the newest, right? And then I had to, oh man, I have to give up grains now. But it was a journey of eliminating till I got to a meal plan where there were no cravings. That whenever something kind of lit me up and gave me that little feeling, I was like on it. I was looking at it going, oh yeah, no. Organic purple corn chips. Look, I didn't give up Black Forest cake for breakfast to fight with you. You're going on the red list. Like if I'm going to fight with the food, it's going to be Black Forest cake, because, right? So that's the thing to pay attention to when you're eating food, even if it's a healthy whole food. If it gives you that little bit of, oh, I want more, you get a little excited, you haven't got that neutrality, just pay attention to it. And it might be easier just to stick it on your red list and just leave it alone, because the whole point of this is to get to a place of peace around food so that we're just nourished. So we as women and men can get our heads off of food and go out and rock out our lives, because we've been decades obsessed, and it's a waste of our time and energy.
Florence, I just have to say that if I disappear out of pictures because I'm taking care of that little puppy, she just got up. So I'm listening. I'm in the room, but you know, I might be around the corner. Yeah.
Awesome, Bitten. No problem at all.
As you know.
You are next up. No problem. Thanks for letting us. I'm afraid of the stress of going back to work after the quarantine. Oh, sorry, after quarantine will send me running back into the arms of my sugar dragon. What do you suggest I do?
Knowledge about addicted brain, knowledge about addictive behavior, addictive thinking, risk situations, relapse prevention, support. I mean, there's so many tools to pick up. What bothers me is that most people I deal with, they think that changing the food is the thing. You know, they are willing to change the food, but they don't understand what Joan is saying, all the crazy wiring, the addictive wiring, and no wiring, no electricity, no cream in the wires, up to all these important parts of the brain. So, I mean, it's like, you know, you have electricity only in the hallway, you know, reptilian brain and the reward center, but it's dark all over the place in the others. So we need to teach them to, you know, neurons that fire together, wire together, and that's what we teach.
Let me just jump in. Florence, that to me sounds so much like a crafty, addictive mind trying to talk itself into, hey, here's a reason.
When I go back to work.
Good. Yeah.
I think that what's really crucial is when that person goes back, that they build their support system even more, because their mind is going to be working not in their favor, and they're going to need people to catch them on it. More support. That would be my answer. More support.
Awesome.
Yeah, we know that the stress pathway and the addiction pathway in the brain are intertwined. It's why people think they have stress eating. No, it's a mechanical reaction. The stress pathway starts to vibrate. It's activated. It just reaches over and vibrates the addiction pathways. So the deal is to train the stress pathway not to respond to stress triggers. Rewire the stress pathway. One of our most common affirmations in our recovery community is, I remain calm under all circumstances. So that's just a training. This is just a training process.
Beautiful. Awesome.
Like Vera and Bitten are saying, you've got to maintain that training, but with exposure to your support group.
Yeah.
For everybody else, you're in a group where everybody is always coming in and talking about, I remained calm in that situation. Well, mirror neurons is, oh, okay, well, we'll remain calm in situations too. It's copying. Got to have people to copy.
Awesome. I am totally with Dr. Tarman on this one, in the sense that, you know, this, I call it the sugar dragon. It has a voice in your head, and it's always suggesting and justifying the consumption of sugar. Anything that suggests or justifies the consumption of sugar is not you, it's your dragon. Yeah. And so I got free, and kind of a quantum shift, a blinding epiphany. I did years of therapy, 12 steps, groups, leaned on other people. It wasn't what set me free. There's lots of right ways to kick sugar and refined. When I say sugar, I mean processed refined carbohydrates. Yeah. And there's different points of view here, but generally speaking, that's manipulation right there. That's your dragon trying to say to you, oh, how are you going to handle this when you go back to work? You can't handle this. And it's already undermining you through two things: fear and doubt. Fear and doubt. As long as it hooks you into fear and doubt, it's got you, instead of you being, you know, in the meta mind, the observer brain, and watching what it's saying and going, really? Yes. You're so cute. So. Oh yeah, right? Just seeing right through it. All right, next question is there a book that has been known to motivate men in particular to give up sugar? I am, of course, thinking of my dear husband who struggles with chronic acne. Personally, I'm going to jump in and say William Duffy for me, because it was written by a man. But I think Dr. Tarman, you're next up. Is that correct?
Sorry. Ask the question again. I'm aware that of time. I have to jump off in 10 minutes, but so I wasn't. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Sorry, I thought we had you for. Oh gosh. Okay. Awesome. Is there a book that could motivate, that could help men or motivate men to get off of sugar?
I would say I don't know of a specific book. I think that's a good one that you mentioned, but I know that there's at least one man's group. So I mean, there are men out there. Well, David Wolf is another one. So there are men out there doing groups, and I think it's a great idea to have a male oriented space, because guys are often going into places where most of the people are women and they feel out of place, and they have different issues and actually different food tastes, food desires, food dragons. And it would be nice to have, you know, more in my, along the lines of mirror neurons. They're going to connect better with like mind.
Yeah.
There is one book written by a man, quite a new book. I think its name is Kick Sugar by Jonathan Cranford.
Oh.
I think his name is Jonathan Cranford. Pretty new. I just read it. It's a man writing about his journey, and he has some tricks. So I think that's a good book for a man.
And it's called Kick Sugar?
I think, oh, I don't remember. Oh, wait a minute. I need to Google it.
Yeah, Google it. Get back to us.
I Google it.
Michael Prager's Fat Boy, Thin Man.
Oh yeah, right, of course. Forgot about him, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, awesome. Next question. Personally, I see it. Okay, so personally, I see. So I think this is for you, Dr. Ifland. Personally, I see a difference between ingesting straight sugar, jelly beans, licorice, hard candy, and sugar plus fat, rich desserts. Straight sugar does not trigger me in the least. I couldn't care less. I think this is common. I also do not crave sweets in the morning when the addiction model says I should be in withdrawal. Wouldn't this suggest that there's more to it than just sugar addiction?
Thank you. Yes, we have a free website, Food Addiction Resources, which is handouts. So as I was writing the textbook, if I came across something, I said, no, I'm not waiting until the end of the textbook. I'll get a handout on this written. So if you go there and click on handouts, you'll scroll down to a handout called Excluded Foods. This is a list of all the foods for which there's some evidence, or with one exception, there's one just flat out humane issue, which is make sure that your proteins have been humanely raised. So this is what she's talking about is a polysubstance abuse syndrome. So what we know, and this is another reason why it's so much harder to treat processed food addiction than any other addiction. It's because of the broad range of substances involved. So, what does that mean? That means that because there are a broad range of substances, all of the addictive pathways are engaged. So it's not like you're doing just alcohol and dopamine is engaged, i.e. hyperactivated. It's also serotonin, opiate, and endocannabinoid, which is named after cannabis, activated by fat. So this is why you need even more hours and hours of reprogramming, because the massive number of neurons that have been trained to helplessly react to cues and get control of behavior. So it's sugars, anything related to sugars, all the associative cueing like we were talking about with vanilla. Flour is a refined carbohydrate that gets into the blood system and can activate serotonin. They're just these nice bodies of work on these issues. Gluten attaches to the same receptors as morphine. Excessive salt activates the opiate pathways. Dairy has 4 different kinds of morphine in it. And one has been shown to attach to the opiate receptors. Caffeine with dopamine, and then food additives. So the things that the tobacco companies, tobacco style business model, we can just add things and we don't have to put them on the label. So this is another reason. This is a substance abuse. And research does show that when addicts are using more than one substance, it takes longer and more hours of reprogramming to give them control. It's just like common sense, practically.
I love it. Fantastic. Okay, I love this next question as well. And it's one that, it's one that's near and dear to my heart, because I do not want to get into the middle of food wars. I think that's a distraction from the fact that we all have a common message, which is get off the processed junk. And then if you want to be sort of more keto or paleo, awesome. If you want to be more high plant-based or what, like, right? Because I just feel like it's a really perfect way for the food giants to get us all fighting about whether or not we should be eating broccoli or beef or tofu or what, black beans, right? So, but I do know that I did some advanced nutritional training with Julia Ross. I was one of her students. And in her course, she said to all of us students, she said, look, I've worked with over 30,000 people over 30 years through my clinic, and I no longer work with vegans. And we were all just shocked because it's a huge trend, and I'm a high plant-based woman. I do very well on lots of vegetables. Thank you very much. And, but I was just shocked, and I thought, wow, to come out so strong against this. And she said, here's why. I can't keep them sugar-free. I can't do it. Not with my supplements, not with my 30 years of experience. I can't keep them from going off the deep end with the junk. And she said, if they call me and they tell me they're vegan, she'll say, I'm sorry, I can't work with you. If you're willing to even do a little bit of this and a little bit of that, I think I can work with you. And I was just so shocked by that. So I remember in my last summit, I asked Bitten about it. She had made a comment. And it became a little bit of a controversy amongst my summit folks, because they're like, why are you vegan bashing? I'm like, I'm not vegan bashing. I'm just trying to tap into the experts on this topic to see if this is something that they have found in their practice, and why. And is there a way that people who lean towards that end of the spectrum can, in fact, join us in the whole food world? So, Bitten, this is a question for you. I'll read it to you. I know
I read it.
Oh, yeah. It's up on the screen. Do you guys see it?
I have it on the screen. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful.
I say the same. I didn't hear Julia Lars saying this. This is something.
So, do you know what, Bitten? Let me just read it for people who are just going to listen.
Oh, sure.
Just so I don't forget to do that. I know some of you have said that vegans are almost impossible to help with sugar addiction. Why is this? Although I've always been vegetarian, I've more recently been trying to be vegan due to a cancer diagnosis, slow growing, thankfully. Sugar and controlling food is a huge battle, and I need help. I just want to understand why it's so hard for you to help us vegans with sugar addiction. Thank you so much.
Okay. I don't work with vegans. I've never been able to get a vegan to stay off sugar and carbs for a long time. They relapse. They don't feel well, and the reason I've read a lot about, the primal people that came on Earth and Western Price Foundation and all that. And, there are three things we have to remember that we don't work out from knowledge and science. It is from beliefs, religion, politics, and food. So let me say this. I choose not to believe in veganism. I choose to believe that our brain needs animal fat, and I choose to believe that we need red meat. So that's my firm, from the science and what I've learned about the human brain and the fatty acid profile in the brain, and also how neurotransmitter, especially dopamine, is made from essential amino acids, which we found in animal protein. So that's my answer.
Are you a blood type O?
No, I'm RH minus.
Oh, okay, interesting. Dr. Ifland, would you like to weigh in on that?
Yeah, the research shows that having animal protein is more stabilizing. So you get a better blood glucose stabilization. The higher the protein, the better the blood stabilization. But I go back to brain function. The brain wants us to eat what it sees. So this is the whole availability issue. If you can persuade the brain that animal products are not available, the brain will settle right down and eat plant products. So the food is 20% or less of the problem. Sorry. The other 80% is body, emotions, environmental cueing, loneliness, and relationships. So if I can get the person to get the animal products out of their house, get the processed foods out of their house, and not look at people who are eating processed foods and meat, that brain will settle down just fine, as long as they're also getting the rewiring in terms of connection to other people. They don't have relationships that are abusive. They're taking care of their bodies. They're exercising. Their bodies are free from pain. In other words, if you can get the rest of the cueing down low enough, and then you can persuade the brain that processed foods are not available and animal products are not available, people will settle down and they'll do just fine. There are cultures there are cultures all the way from the Eskimos that do that carnivore diet to jungle cultures that it's just too hard to kill an animal and eat it. So they're plant-based. That's on the one hand, and on the other hand, it's very, very easy to get plants. It is harder. It takes more training. It takes more hours in these retraining environments. And then it takes a lot more willingness and skill to persuade the primitive brain. In other words, you've got to be capable enough to keep those cues away from that primitive brain. It can be done. It absolutely can be done. And vegans I'm happy to have them in my program.
Awesome. And typically what I do is that I say for the first 90 days, if there are some animal-based proteins that you could live with, like maybe some fish or something, maybe a little chicken, or maybe a little bit of beef or whatever, in the first 90 days, just for that blood stabilization, deregulation, for that optimal amino acid replenishment, because we're incredibly deficient as sugar addicts, that can be very helpful. And then you can decide. So I could tell you a little bit about my meal plan that I recommend everybody for the first 90 days. But after that, you can go back and see how you do. And if it triggers cravings, stay in that place where you can maybe have a little bit of chicken and some black beans. And then you can maybe phase out the chicken and see how you do. But if it triggers those cravings and it takes you back to the sugar, then see if you can find a sweet spot between being mostly plant-based with a little bit of animal protein. And for some people, they can phase right off the animal protein, it seems to me, but they are typically doing very high leafy greens. I have yet to see a vegan stay sugar-free long-term if they're not getting enough leafy greens in, and some people can't digest them, especially when they're later in their 60s and 70s. They can't digest them, especially raw or fresh. So there's commonalities amongst, and I wonder if that's what you've experienced as well, Joan. There's commonalities that they're getting enough protein in, truly, like lots of leafy greens, lots of beans, nuts and seeds. It's not just like brown rice and steamed, carrots and like it's not all the high carb stuff, because that's the preconditions for the possibility of a relapse happening sometime in the near future. Dr. Tarman, we're talking a little bit about can vegans be successfully sugar-free for life?
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry about that. I'm hosting another Zoom meeting very shortly, and I had to open that up. My experience is that I don't have very much experience, so I rely on people like Chef AJ, who are totally devoted to the concept of food addiction and are vegan living. So I think that there's, I very much want to support them, because that is a political movement, but I don't know anything about it, and I have to plead ignorance and gratitude for people like that who speak.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. And it's really great that we have so many advanced blood work tests now that we can do. So you can sometimes take the guesswork out of it. Am I doing okay on whatever meal plan I've chosen, whole food meal plan I've chosen? And you can work with doctors who can test to look to see if your numbers are in ratios that are ideal. And Dr. Naisha Winter's really, really great at that. She's hard to work with. I don't even think she's taking clients, but she can recommend blood tests and stuff that can help you make sure that at the cellular level as well, that what you're doing is working for you. All right, so I'm Fiona and I'm joining from London. Awesome, welcome Fiona. I gave up sugar and flour at the start of this year. I'm feeling good and have lots of energy and less anxiety. I'm replacing my addiction with oatmeal. I have it for breakfast before bed and now I want it in smoothies with fruit and milk in the daytime too. Maybe it's not a problem. It's healthy after all. But what do you think? I wonder if the brain always needs to be addicted to something. Thank you for your thoughts. And Dr. Tarman, I think you're up next. Is that right? Or is it Joan Ifland? No, Dr. Tarman.
Okay, well, she's right. The brain is addicted to something. So once it's addicted to something, it's now addicted, and it's an addicted brain. And there's going to be always a search for a replacement or a substitution. So I think she's speaking from the point of view of somebody who has developed an addiction, and then transfer addiction is just super easy. You know, I'm going to be really honest about this. I have yet to meet somebody who has lived in our society with no addictive potential, because it's just, there's so much available. And now we're doing it to kids and, you know, cigarettes and earlier on. So I think really, I'm just going to say it's not even, we don't even know what the human mind looks like without addiction. We are an addicted generations. And so, yes, the answer is it will always be addicted to something. So basically, our lifestyle is a recovery lifestyle, and it will be ever vigilant of the addictive cues that are out there. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's it for me.
I love it. Bitten or Joan, would you like to jump in?
What's the question? Sorry, I need to look it up.
No worries. It's about oatmeal. So she's given up sugar and flour and she's feeling better. And now she's eating oatmeal for breakfast. And now she's having it before bed. Now she's craving it or wanting it during the day with milk.
It's a starch. It's a starch. And any starch is sugar. Starch is sugar molecules holding hands.
It's true.
That's my answer.
Yep. Yep.
So this is why 12-step groups are lifetime groups. It's because of what Vera was just saying, is that programming is there. It's just like riding a bicycle, it's going to be there for life. But I do want to offer some hope, which is the recovery life is a beautiful life. And, you know, not only do you have control over the substances, but you're also like really constantly building better skills to be kind to people, to be considerate, to be thoughtful, to be compassionate, to be patient. You're just, people in recovery are terrific, and training and staying in a recovery community is, it's just the coolest. You know, it's not a sentence, it's not punishment, it's not, oh, you have to do this. No, I want to do this. I want to be around people who are really thinking about their behavior and thinking about how they could do things better, and you know, maintaining a reading life, for example. What are you reading? Oh, I'm reading this and I'm learning that. They're engaged in life, so they're leading their fullest life. And I don't know, because I've been in a lot of recovery, you know, therapeutic communities. I have never seen any other recovery or any other like lifestyle community do a better job of creating really people who are leading their full life, their intellect, their emotion, their hearts, their bodies, than an alcohol, drug, processed food recovery community. I love it. I love being in recovery. I love talking to people. I talk to them all day long. So what do you think kindness really means? Oh, you know what? I noticed I was kind to this person. It was great. I felt so good. it's joyful, it's fun, it's interesting. Why wouldn't everybody want to be in a recovery community?
Yeah, awesome. I think it's really important to lead with that message of hope and a positive and the depression. Something, I'll never have sugar again, but then in fact you'll have a life that's worth living.
So cool. So cool to be free. Yeah.
I love that, Dr. Tarman. Yeah, and I feel like what you're giving up is feel when we're trying to pull away from sugar and processed foods and all the foods that we love. Like I loved Black Forest cake for breakfast. Truly, that is the ideal breakfast for me. But at the time, I was so focused on what I was going to miss out on, the deprivation of my favorite breakfast. But when I'm eating sugar, I don't even notice what I'm depriving myself of right? So when I eat sugar, I'm depriving myself of peace of mind, of energy, of a clear, resilient emotional state. I deprive myself of being able to be present at parties, because the minute I have one brownie at a party, all I'm thinking about for the rest of the party is, can I get to another one? And is anyone going to notice I'm having number 5? I'm gone. I'm no longer in relationship with people. I never focus on what I'm depriving myself of when I'm going off the deep end with junk food. Yeah. And so what recovery allows us to do is realize that when you look at the scales, what sugar brings us is so much less than what a sugar-free life brings us. So I love that message. It's so much better on the other side. We wouldn't be doing this if we didn't genuinely believe we're leading you in the direction of happiness and joy and peace and wellness. I wanted to jump in on this oatmeal topic too, because for me, this sets off a red alarm. And I did this. I got off the processed junk, absolutely. But then all of a sudden I started to sort of, my dragon, this addictive part of me, started to pull in these sort of healthier whole foods that I could justify. Well, it's oatmeal, it's corn chips, they're organic, whatever, right? And I could justify them. And I slowly had to figure out, oh, no. So here's the 5 pillars of the meal plan that I recommend to all of my clients, at least for the first 90 days. No sugar of any kind. Anything that's used to sweeten a food that isn't naturally sweet is off the table. Artificial sweeteners, stevia, all of them. No sugar, no refined starches. No snacking. And this is really just coming from my 12 food addiction days. No snacking, because when we snack, it's almost always because we're going into a little bit of that glucose dip and our body's trying to guide us towards some kind of carb that keeps us from being metabolically flexible into healing our metabolisms. So no snacking. There's lots of other good reasons why we don't snack. It also completely eliminates the habit around emotional eating, reaching for food when we're uncomfortable or bored or tired. That ends at the same time as your addiction when there's no snacking. The 4th pillar is serving sizes. So making sure that you've got a really solid sense of what is enough food in your meal plan, because so often we undereat and we don't make it between meals. So and I do mine's the 5x5. I can talk about that later. And the 5th one is simple. We need to bore the sugar dragon to death. If it's bored and going, oh my God, salad and black beans and chicken again, I'm like, yeah, the dragon's bored. I'm doing something right. I'm just here to refuel. I'm not here to party with food anymore. This isn't the highlight of my day. And sometimes I'm like Bitten. I hate cooking. I hate being in the kitchen. The quicker I can get in and get out, the happier I am. So I throw stuff in the Instapot, and sometimes it comes back out and I'm like, I don't care. I eat it. It's my food. It's whole foods, and I move on with my day. So, and for some of you that are gourmet and love to make elaborate, beautiful meals, that's okay. But in the early days of recovery, simple is so important for so many reasons. We're tired, but partly because we want to bore the part of our brain that's constantly looking for novelty and dopamine hits from our foods. So Fiona, I'm going to say the way you're treating oatmeal in what you've written, your dragon's just trying to sneak it in the back door. You're probably wanting fruit and milk and oatmeal because it knows you're not going to eat sugar. So it's actually going to kind of the next level of sugar, but it's still sugar. It's still feeding your addiction. You're never going to get to this place of total peace. So I would say nip it in the bud, get back to 3 square meals a day, no snacking, and you'll see that oatmeal will have a place in your meal plan potentially, but it's not going to be something that's, it's being snuck in the back door. Okay.
Next one is mine.
Take it. Okay. So Who said that?
Bitten.
Bitten, okay.
If a person primarily binges on sweets, how can they tell if they have a sugar addiction or a binge eating disorder? It seems like an important distinction since the recommended treatments for the two conditions are very different. Thank you for that question. I'll tell you, there's a way. You do a sugar evaluation by one of my trained professionals that are sugar certified and licensed. They will tell you right off the bat, it's an interview 45 minutes, and then you will know for sure if you have a pathological use, which is addiction, or if you have a harmful use. And then if you have eating problems, that might be an eating disorder. But I also like to point out that most sugar addicts will, with time, develop what I call process addictions, like binge eating, overeating, restriction, in a way, as a way of trying to control the sugar craving and on-off on the sugar. So I don't call those things eating disorders. I call them process addictions, like volume eating, volume addiction, binging, starving, whatever. Exercising, you know, dieting, blah, 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 as ways to control the crazy brain of a sugar addict. So, but there's ways to know that. So,
Dr. Ifland, want to jump in?
We have 11 chapters out of the textbook here are describing how addictive behaviors manifest in overeating, in processed food consumption. The American Psychiatric Association has spent 50 years defining the 11 behaviors that are common in alcoholism. And I adapted them to overeating. Actually, let me say that accurately. I adapted them to processed food addiction. And there's a chapter with citations. You know, does this behavior exist in eating behaviors? Yes, and here's the evidence. So Bitten has developed this unbelievable evaluation that I can't wait to take for myself. Actually, I heard somebody else, the recording of somebody else taking it, and it brought up so much stuff for me and saw my whole history in a completely different light. So I can't recommend Bitten's evaluation enough. Everybody should do Bitten's evaluation. So, but a quick one is to go to our website, Food Addiction Reset. So we have two websites, Food Addiction Resources and Food Addiction Reset. And the 11 DSM criteria are there in a self-quiz. So you can go in and take the self-quiz and you can check them off. 6 or more is a serious addiction. And I've hardly ever met anybody who has less than 6. So this is another way that I know that this is a common addiction in our culture. So it always goes back to the substances. If you can just take everything back to the substances. I love what Bitten just said, which is these quote unquote eating disorders are attempts to cope with, you know, thank you diet industry, which makes food addiction worse. It's an attempt to cope with the core addiction, which is to this group of highly addictive, like sugar is more addictive than cocaine. These are highly addictive substances. So I mean, this may sound disrespectful, but in cocaine addiction, nobody says that cocaine addict has a snorting disorder.
I like that.
Cocaine addiction. And nobody says that a heroin addict has a shooting up disorder. No, he's got heroin addiction. So the fact that the tobacco industry has done such a good job of deceiving us, they hid the addictive substances in our food. People just, it's so hard to wrap your brain around that you keep thinking, oh, it must have something to do with eating. No, eating is just the method of ingestion. It's the method of consumption. And nobody says, you know, a smoker has a breathing disorder or they got an inhaling disorder. Let's make their trachea smaller. No, that is the core problem, is that people don't see this is a straight up, really serious substance use disorder that has a lot of manifestations and a lot of mythology and confusion.
And I'm going to jump in to say that there is a book called Brain Over Binge, and the woman who wrote that book, Catherine Hansen, and I have all my clients read it, ended a binge eating disorder, but she wasn't a sugar addict, so she still dabbles, she still eats sugar. And she says that, I eat it every now and then, whatever, it's a non-issue for me. Awesome. I'm a sugar addict. So for me, my binge eating was entirely tied to the substances that triggered the desire to overeat. If I take out the foods that create the cravings, that create the desire for binging, my binge eating disorder resolved itself. But the reality is that for you, you could try doing something like that approach, where what you do is you listen, you respond to the cue to binge. We all feel it. We know what it feels like. Not everybody who's a sugar addict is a binge eater, actually. I've had clients that are not. They just dabble all day long, and they don't tend to binge.
The grazers.
The grazers. And they're a little bit trickier for me to work with anyways, because for me, when I feel that desire, when I look at a food and I feel that little bit, I get a little bit lit up and I feel the desire to binge, that awakens my consciousness. And immediately I kind of wake up and I look at it and I know immediately it's a hot stove. I've just got that aversion to processed foods. It's built in now. That's wired into my neurology. But for someone who's a grazer, they don't have that sort of binge desire. So it's a little bit trickier. It can be in their mouth before they've, oh man, I just stuck another jujube in my mouth, right? But if you're a binge eater, it's awesome because that cue is so strong and so clear. As soon as that cue comes up, you can awaken your consciousness and go, you can either choose to, then you learn how to ignore it. Oh yeah, I see the urge, and you meta-mind it, you observe it, and you kind of can separate from it so it doesn't hook you. It's like some idiot coming up and telling you to go do something, and you're like, no, not going to happen, right? And so, but I would suggest you can try and read her book, Brain Over Binge, and maybe you can try and follow her process, which is to listen to the response, the binge cue, and to learn to ignore it, and you just move on. Or what you could do is you could use the same thing, that whatever. And if you find that ending your binge eating doesn't end by doing that, it's probably that sugar addiction is behind it. And if you deal with the sugar addiction, your binge eating disorder is going to resolve itself. At least that's been my experience. Is that true for both you and Joan and Bitten?
Yeah, but it takes work.
Go ahead, Bitten.
Well, your behavior, which I call a process addiction, could be as powerful as, gambling or any other process addictions. You have to understand addiction interaction disorder, one addictive brain, many outlets. And once you curb one outlet, the brain is trying to find something else, That's why it's like Joan say, and I say about retraining the brain, which is a very, very tough work, and you need lots of tools. But there are some questions here. What am I going to do with my craving? I just read through some of them, and the answer is the same for many of them. First of all, you need to be proactive. You have to decide, for today, I'm going to eat like this. And you eat according to this new drug-free food plan. And you also have to plan your day. And you do it only one day at a time. But you have to have a plan. You can't just go haphazard. Oh, what am I going to eat today? And then you come along, the donut center and the smells and the cue-induced cravings, which are deadly on our brain. So you have to understand these things, and you have to understand that there is not one thing you can do about your thoughts, feelings, and urges. There's no way going into, but most of us have false thoughts, feelings, and crazy urges due to the sugar, to the drugs, sugar, flour. So, if you start analyzing those, you're you're dead. You're into the sugar before you even say sugar. So you have to understand that the only way you can start rewiring your brain is by changing behavior. You got to do different. I joke with my clients and say, start brushing your teeth with the opposite hand, walk backwards through the doors. It's actually, I saw this scientist, Dana Sohar, and she said something important, and I got this is just a little kid's toy, but I think it explains this very well. It's when, what we do is we create a controlled crisis when we tell somebody about, their sugar addiction and how their life looks with the sugar. So what we do is we shock them. It's because when you're shook up, your then your brain goes, woohoo! You know, that's when you can start making new wiring. So if you go do the same thing all over, you know, it's nothing going to happen. Nothing going to happen. You have to do opposites. You have to do physical changes, behavior changes. And then my clients say, oh, but that's so boring. Nothing is fun today. Well, that's because you have instant gratification with the drug. And now we're working on delayed gratification, which of course is, you know, everything feels boring. But if you do it 20 times, I promise you, it's going to feel fine. So you have to practice and do it and do it and do it, even though you don't like it. But
Yeah.
that's what it's basically all about in recovery. You have to do things that might not feel fun today in order to gain, you know, the gratification, maybe 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And in order to handle that, you know, desert walk, as many of us feel it is, we have to hang with other people doing the same thing. I mean, I feel mostly alive when I talk to other recovering addicts, because, I mean, they have a special way of look at life. They have retrained their brain. They think in a certain way. I mean, like when I talked to Joan, I was high after the first time we talked, because we were talking like this, you know, and the same with you, Florence. So you need to start collecting recovering people around you and start talking to them and ask. And I also love working with solution-oriented groups. Like if I have a problem, I called Joan or Florence and I said, if this was your problem, what would you do? And they, because addicts hate when you tell them, you should do this or you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
It's not going to work on us. So, but then recovering people will say, well, you know, if that was my problem, I would do this. And I might call several people and hear, what would you do? And I get several solutions. And then I do I try to do myself what they said. That's how you retrain your brain. So it's going to be boring in the beginning, but heck, you know, you're going to survive and you're going to reach the other end of the desert walk, and you're going to have more fun than you ever had in your life.
Yes, it's just the life without sugar seems boring, but it is super cool. I just have one more thought that about the approach that you were talking about, Florence. So somebody who says, "Oh, I have sugar sometimes," what they're missing is that sugar does more damage actually than cigarettes. So this is an analogy which brings things into focus. That Nancy Appleton book, Lick the Sugar Habit, even at that time, 30 years ago, she had a list of 125 diseases and the study that showed the connection to sugar.
Yeah.
Processed foods are the leading cause of preventable death on the planet. And they have overtaken smoking as the leading cause of preventable death. So anyone who says, oh, I have sugar sometimes, just put the word cigarette in there and you can see how, that's why I hesitated. I don't have the right word. You can see how blank it is. So if you say, I have a cigarette sometime.
I know. I hear you.
I have a little bit of heroin on Saturdays.
I know,
I
but
do heroin every now and then, or I do cocaine, you know, I just have
I just eat a little bit of dog poo. Yeah, just a little. I know, and I really struggle with this. And I only honor the work of Catherine Hansen and people that come out of the emotional eating world, because they teach their clients to snack on junk food to make peace with it. And it's this whole approach. And I don't want to be the kind of person that bashes other people's work and approaches and truths. But I have to say that, look, if you're not addicted to sugar and you're the type of person that can take it or leave it, oh, for God's sake, leave it. Like, if you're not addicted, why are you eating it?
Yes.
Like, who in their right mind would put that processed junk in their bodies?
No, I mean, the inability to control use is only one of 11 addiction criteria. And people will say, well, he doesn't have a problem with it. He can eat 2 of those and just move on. It's like, no. He doesn't have a problem with cigarettes. He can smoke 1 and just move on. No, that's not, it hurts. He's hurting himself.
Yes.
Oh, they can just cut themselves once intentionally and just move on. No, you're
right. Yes. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. If you can't, yes, that's right. And well, I can moderate it. Well, great. So if you have the choice of not eating it, what on earth is compelling you to put that in your mouth? Right.
Well, it's just ignorance.
Yes.
You just see what a great job the tobacco companies have done of creating delusion. They made cigarettes sexy. You know, cigarettes are disgusting.
They are.
Disgusting. The least sexy, attractive thing you could possibly do. And they made processed foods fun and delicious. So that's the
Colorful.
They're beautiful, colorful, beautiful. Like some of those modern day cakes are just works of art. Someone has a question here about inositol, saying that it is sugar-based. I have not known anyone to have issues with it. Do either of you have issues with people taking it? Okay.
No. If they take it as a vitamin, one capsule, I don't think anything is going to happen.
Yeah, I know for me it triggers migraines, but I mean, I have a very sensitive body, but I would say non-issue. I'm in the process of learning how to not act on my thoughts to binge. I am having the most trouble with not acting on these urges when they appear out of nowhere. I feel like I have no time to control either. Okay, that's just a technique question. That's probably longer than...
I've answered that already in many ways.
Okay.
Yeah, you just need to retrain more neurons.
Yep, yeah.
Oh, for some reason, let me pull this up. I think that's my issue here. And then let's just take a couple more questions and we'll promise to do this again, just because I know we've been going for a couple of hours. I know it is a habit. What is your advice for becoming more aware of these urges and not acting them? I've been doing this for over 50 years. So there's a difference between a habit and an addiction. I'm going to jump in here. There's a difference between a bad habit and an addiction. And the book, The Affliction of Addiction by Adam McArnold, argues that addiction is a biochemical reaction, and it's the intensity and the speed at which a substance affects our brain chemistry. So if it's really fast and really intense, we're more likely to become addicted to it. And if there's no reaction and it's a real delayed reaction, you're not likely to become addicted to it. So for people who have a bad habit, there might be a little bit of a pleasure lift or some sort of, something kind of nice happening, but your willpower can, if you have a really good reason, some support, some great recipes, a bad habit can be addressed by willpower and you can turn it around and just move on. Addictions do not respond to willpower because it was never designed for that, ever. It's meant to get our butt out of bed at 7 o'clock in the morning when we need to go to the gym or get to work, but willpower being used to deal with an unrelenting, unabating desire for these drug-like foods. It's just exhausting. Sooner or later, it's going to fail you, which is why all these different tools and strategies are being talked here today. If you have a habit, it's different than addiction, and probably you should do Bitten's assessment. I haven't done it. Sounds very intriguing, but there's lots of quizzes you can take to determine whether or not you're truly addicted versus whether you just have a bad habit. You can relatively easily, with a bit of effort and some good reasons, get off it. So if you are if you've been doing this for 50 years, my guess is you're probably an addict, which means that reach out for help. Don't do this alone. We're talking about the importance of finding experts and communities that can support you. Anyone else want to add something to that?
Yeah, well, when you know how harmful these substances are, it's just like I don't have cocaine in my house. I don't have cigarettes in my house. These substances, they're addictive substances. Just like, why do I have them in my house? It's because I have bought into the tobacco company's advertising and delusion campaign. And I still think that they're kind of fun. Just like people thought cigarettes were fun. They should, this is universal. Yes, we have a lot of talk about addiction. Is it addiction? Is it a habit? Just cut through all of that discussion. And like, if you don't have cocaine in your house, you shouldn't have processed foods in your house for the same reasons.
And I think it's interesting when we do the assessment, the sugar assessment, the other variable is harmful use. It's not even a habit. We're not even talking habit. If it is not an addiction, it's harmful use. I think that's an interesting terminology. Harmful.
I love it. Right. Who cares if it's ultimately, who cares if it's a habit or an addiction? Get rid of it.
It's harmful. Yeah, it's a great word, harmful.
I don't believe in habits. I mean, throw that habit, you do it maybe a couple of times and then you quit. But, harmful use is very dangerous too, but it isn't addiction. But you need to understand the difference.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Every bite is harmful, and every bite of processed foods is harmful.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. How do we get the frontal lobe working more and override the primitive animal brain?
It's not going to happen.
Do it different.
The frontal lobe is 2% of the brain. The frontal lobe will never, ever, ever control the other 98% of the brain. You have to retrain the other 98%, which is they're conditioned cells. All cells are subject to conditioning. Pavlovian conditioning, Pavlovian learning. You've got to train that other 98% of the brain to respond differently to cues. Like one of our big affirmations is that food makes me sick. So if I look at a processed food or a shop that's got some kind of seductive messaging in the window, I have trained my neurons to go straight to that food makes me sick. That's a training. That's like learning a language. I know the word for car in English, and now I want to know the word for car in French. So by repetition, Bitten's talking about doing it over and over again, I make my car, voiture, flashcard, and then when I'm in France, I look at a car and the word voiture comes to mind. So instead of looking at a processed food and say, oh, I love that, it's my birthday, it's so yummy, you go, oh, that food makes me sick. That's retraining neurons.
I love it. All right, we've been at 2 hours and there's so many good questions left. So I guess what we'll probably have to do is see if we can talk these beautiful, fine women back into maybe a part 2 some other time when our schedules permit. So these questions are great. And maybe Amy and I as well could, so you don't feel high and dry, maybe Amy and I can make an effort to try and answer these questions as well another time. So thank you, everybody. So Bitten and Joan, do you feel like this is a good place to end?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Is there any final comments you'd like to make, Bitten, before we wrap up today?
No, I think, a lot of the questions are sort of the same, but from different angles. So I think that people would get, a lot of things out of what we've talked about without getting their specific question answered, is what I see. I just want to say one thing to somebody that asked, where do I learn more about relapse prevention? There's an old book called Staying Sober by Terence T. Gorski. It's the first book about relapse prevention that I read, and it absolutely blew my mind when I understood, the sequence of risk situation, relapse, warning signs, triggers, cues. And I thought, oh my God, because relapse is not something that comes out of the blue and hit you in the head.
Oh.
You need to learn, Joan talking about the mirror neurons, you need to retrain your brain to handle it, Otherwise you're a sitting duck for boom.
Yeah, I'm going to just segue right onto that and say, somebody is going to control that other 98% of the brain through messaging.
Yeah.
It's either going to be you through deliberate control and adjustment of your house, car, travel pathways, people, or it's going to be the food industry.
We don't want that.
I love it. I love that.
Marketing. So don't just fall into the delusion of like, oh, I'll be okay if I don't do anything. No, there's a predator out there. The food industry, addiction, marketing scientists use a technique called surround marketing, where first they addict and then they provoke. So you've got to be proactive about your cueing.
I love that, Joan. You know what I love most about it is because addicts tend to be feisty. Jack Trimpey says that you can't be an addict if you don't have very strong life force energy. You can't handle getting high, right? And for people who are addicts are the lucky ones, because we actually can get lit up by life. We have the capacity to get lit up and be alive, whereas there are people who come in flat and they can't. We're lucky. We just need to get lit up on stuff that isn't killing us. But because we're so feisty and we're sort of like, don't tell me what to do types, right? I love that idea that we can put in our brain that either we're going to control what the decisions are of that 98% or some predatorial, food giant is. I think that's going to really get us fired up to sort of push back even more against those foods that are designed to take our money and take our lives. Awesome. Amy, welcome. Thank you so much. Amy was behind the scenes working on the chat, summarizing some of our key points. So thank you so much. Amy, do you want to add any final comments before we wrap up today?
Well, I just stayed off screen because it was about all these beautiful women. 4 of you are legends in the addiction world, in the sugar addiction world. You all have changed my life so incredibly. 3.5 years ago on the 2nd annual Kick Sugar Summit that I listened to, and I bow to you. Bitten, I'm thinking about taking your course because yeah, I'd love to do that. Florence and I are certified health coaches through another organization, and I just want more training, and I love what you ladies stand for and shining in this world, and Vera Tarman, Dr. Vera Tarman as well. You've made a difference, and thank you for taking the time on this Saturday to be with us, and keep shining, and just so much love and gratitude to all of you.
Thank you.
Say hi.
Oh. True dopamine hits we get to have.
Pet versus sugar. Take the pet.
Yeah, and oxytocin. And I tell you what, we need to learn a lot about oxytocin. I'm implementing that in my classes the last 2 years. And I work with this researcher at Karolinska, and I tell you that in the future, you're going to have her on to talk about satiety and oxytocin.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, I love it.
Because
absolutely.
It's very important for us. Very important for us.
Very beautiful. It's love. It's the love molecule. It's really the most important, probably. Awesome. Thank you again, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you found this valuable. And thanks, Joan and Bitten and Amy.
Thank you for having me.
Bye. Thank you for having me. Yes. Bye-bye.
Bye.